Today we have a very special video. I've been a Sony user for more than 4 years, and today's the day that I'm gonna know if I need the A7IV or not. And for that I have a very special guest with me today. Ciao, Claudio.
Ciao!
And we're gonna test 10 different points, and we're gonna decide if it's whatever, if we like the feature, or if we really need it. Both of us are gonna vote, and by the end we're gonna know if I have to upgrade or if he has to downgrade. Yeah, I'm Henry, Brazilian photographer and filmmaker, living in Italy, and in this channel I help with the tech tools to be creative. And in this video, you're gonna see that in all comparisons we made, the A7IV is gonna come out on top of the A7III, but sometimes the difference was really small or almost unnoticeable. Now if you're here just for an answer and you got the budget for it, just go with the A7IV. You're gonna have many more features and a much more complete and updated camera than the A7III. But if you want to know what is the best value option, you should stick until the end and see all the tests we made. So my experience with the screen on the A7III is really good. The screen is really bright. Viewfinder is amazing for pictures or for videos. I have no trouble at all with it. One of the things that clearly the A7IV wins, and I will have to agree with it immediately, is about the flip out screen. That especially when you're recording yourself, like I am right now, would be so handy. Because if I use an external monitor, the head autofocus does not work, and that's a massive trouble for me. So I'm usually just hoping that I'm recording myself correctly and it works. But the screen is pretty good, and I can just flip it out like this, and it works really good for doing stuff from below or from above. It's fine.
So the flip out screen is pretty good, it's pretty comfortable, you got a very good rotation, you can like watch it this way, and if you have to like vlogging yourself, it's pretty easy to do that. So I can see me, and with your camera you have a few problems.
We're talking about your camera, not this.
Okay. A thing that I found out, which can be pretty annoying, if you connect the cables here, you have to watch out because you cannot rotate the screen, otherwise it's going to touch the cables, especially with the HDMI. It's like you have one screen connected this way. It never been like a real problem, but I can imagine that for someone probably can be. So I was filming a concert, I need to watch on the viewfinder, so I closed the monitor and the camera stopped recording. I will never do that mistake again.
So now in the studio I've been using the Monitor Plus app so that I can see myself while recording with the A7III, and it's been fantastic. The only issue is what I mentioned before, in which the face autofocus is not active when I'm using this through the USB-C cable. And don't get me wrong, because contrast autofocus on the Sony camera is also really good. But sometimes, for example, even for these videos, I saw that the focus changed a little bit to my hands, or maybe to some object that was too shiny here on the table. And these are the moments in which the face autofocus totally shines, because then I can be totally sure that I'm gonna be sharp. And when I'm recording outside, I really like to have the phone in my hands to fire up the camera remotely, and also have the script with me. So not having a flippy screen is kind of boring because of that. I guess it's one of the things that when you have it, you don't want to go back anymore. Time to vote. Is this a whatever, pretty good, or I need it feature?
I would say is pretty good.
I'll have to say that this is one that I actually really need. Because filming myself without having any idea what's happening in the background, you probably saw many videos in this channel that already had my monitor turning off, my light turning off, and I didn't even notice. That would be totally solved with the flip out screen, so I need it. Let's take a look also at the viewfinder and some other features.
So me and Harry, we switch our camera to see if we notice any huge difference between viewfinders, and they're pretty good viewfinders. Everything is super bright and with a high definition, but between this camera and his, we didn't notice any particular difference. They are equal for us.
Now in theory, the viewfinder of the A7IV features 3.5 million dots against only 2.3 from the A7III. But this is so much in such a tiny screen that we didn't notice the difference. Also, the LCD screen on the back has a higher resolution, but also in this case we couldn't tell them apart. So regarding these features, for us it was a draw, but there are many other small features that the A7IV implements, like for example the ring on top, in which you can select photo or video mode. That is really practical. The menu system that is the same from the A7S III, and it's way improved, much clearer. The support for CF Express Type A cards, and also the full HDMI port. So all of these are gonna make using the camera an overall improved experience. But are these vital? Well, not for us at least. So in this case, both of us stuck with the pretty good features, but not exactly decision making.
I'm terrible taking pictures. I'm so sorry for all the audience.
It's not the camera, no. Okay, so what if we talk a little bit about photography now? Okay, so for this test, Claudio is gonna walk towards the camera and then sideways and then back. And this is gonna test two different things. The first one is how many shots can we get before the buffer fills up on both cameras, considering we're gonna be using the same SD card for both shoots. And also I wanna know if there's any kind of difference between the autofocus of these two systems.
It was showing me the symbol that it was like overeating, but because we left like 10 minutes right out of the sun.
Bravo. In the end, it reduced the speed a little bit, but the buffer cleared much faster, which doesn't make sense. Okay, so let's explain what happened over there. And this could be a very easily win for the A7 III if poorly explained, but there are some caveats. Now both cameras shot roughly 75 frames, between 12 and 15 seconds, and the speed was roughly the same, with the exception that the A7 IV shoots higher resolution frames, meaning that the files are also larger. And doing some maths, it seems like the buffer size of both cameras is very similar and around the 2 GB size. So the catch here was, using this Sony UHS-II card, it was impossible to prevent these cameras from filling up the buffer, because they are just not fast enough to write from the buffer to the card so that it can be cleared and always allow us to shoot. And you can see that in the A7 IV photoshoot, because I started lagging when we were around 60 shots, which is exactly roughly there about 2 GB. And then the small fraction of time in which it stops shooting, it just has the time to write something to the SD card, release the buffer so that you can shoot again and begin the process all over again. Okay, so how to prevent that if you want to shoot in the same rhythm? Well, the only way is if you have something faster to write on, like a CF Express Type A card that the A7 IV supports. So if you have one of those and you can write down about 700 to 800 megabytes per second, it almost means that you can shoot directly into the SD card, barely using the buffer. So the result of this test tells us that if you're gonna shoot something for 10 seconds on a roll in a burst mode like we did, there's not gonna be any problem with one camera or the other. But now if you need to shoot more frames per second or longer than 10 seconds shooting in that same burst mode that we used, then you're gonna need the A7 IV with the CF Express Type A card, or even another camera that is faster than these ones, like for example the A9 or the A1. And by the way, I didn't mention anything about the autofocus yet, because both of them did exceptionally well in both tests. They guaranteed 100% of frames totally in focus without any issues. And by the way, if you happen to be a lover of bird photography, then you're into a treat with the A7 IV, because it has also IAF for birds. And we tested it, and the reality is that always the photo is sharper around the eye of the birds, which makes it quite easier to shoot it than with the A7 III, for example, in which I got many shots with the tail in focus or maybe the ground really close to it. So it's definitely not as accurate as with the A7 IV. Okay, so for this category, my vote is meh, doesn't change much. And for Claudio, oh, meh also. Okay, so now is the time that you were waiting for regarding photography, which is the pixel peeping of the 24 versus 33 megapixels to see if we notice any kind of difference between these two cameras. And the result here is that yes, it is noticeable, yes, it is sharper with 33 megapixels when seen at 100%. But when you're seeing it a little bit farther away, it's so difficult to tell the difference between these two. So regarding photography for digital means, like for example posting on social media or just showing them on YouTube, or simply for seeing them on your computer properly without zooming in, it's very hard to notice the difference. Now there's one case in which you really might like having these extra megapixels, which is exactly for printing. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the sizes in which you could print both of these files from A7 III and A7 IV. And roughly you can get a 36% larger area in the print by using the higher megapixel count camera. Which actually means that you can have 3 inches more on the width and 3 inches on the height. And as usual with all the results of these tests, there's no yes or no clear answer to if it's necessary or not, because it also depends on how far someone is going to be looking at your print and how far you're going to be looking at the digital file also. So I think in this case, it would be considered a pretty good feature for me, but not a decision making yet. And Claudio? All right, on to the next topic. Since autofocus is a very big highlight in Sony cameras in general, we decided to test it separately for video also. And in the case of the A7IV, it is promised to have a better performance overall, and also the introduction of the IAF for video. And what we noticed here was very similar to what we saw in the photography part, in which the autofocus was already so snappy and so good on the face itself that it's difficult to tell apart when it's focused on the eye or on the face, if not zoomed in a little bit. So until the medium shots more or less, we couldn't really tell the difference when looking at the footage if the focus was shifted towards the nose or if it was precisely on the eyes. So unless you're doing very close-up shots with a very fast lens, the difference is not going to be that noticeable between both of these cameras, and both perform impressively well. So in this case, I would vote it pretty good. Alright, so now what about 8-bit versus 10-bit? So all the hype about this feature made me think that there was a massive difference between 8-bit and 10-bit, and that maybe I would even be capable to fix poorly shot footage because of the 10-bit flexibility. So what I discovered testing this is that yes, it is better than 8-bit, but it's nowhere near a raw image, for example. It was definitely more noticeable on the sky or in reflections where it had some kind of gradation of colors. But really to notice the difference, I had to zoom in quite a lot. Comparing the HLG3 on the A7III and the S-Cinetone on the A7IV, both of them performed really well, and I didn't have that much more flexibility to play with the colors over there. Now there's one thing to point out here, and that is that using the 10-bits codec, you can actually take all advantage of the S-Log picture profiles you got on the camera, a thing that you shouldn't really do on the A7III, and I have plenty of examples from the A7III of footage that has blotchy colors because it was poorly exposed or because it was pushed too far. So in this case, just deciding between 8-bit and 10-bit, considering the flexibility and the gradation of colors, for me it was a pretty good result in which I could definitely use this feature, but it was less noticeable than I would imagine before. So here are our votes. Let's talk about picture profiles. Now regarding picture profiles, both of these cameras offer the same array of different profiles like the Cine profiles, HLG, S-Log, but in the case of the A7IV, you get one extra picture profile, which is the now famous S-Cinetone, and also considering the 10-bits codec that we mentioned before, you can now actually have access to the S-Log profiles without any kind of trouble associated with it. Now what we compared here was the HLG3 on the A7III against the S-Cinetone and the S-Log 3 on the A7IV. And for me, the ease of use and quality of the image of the HLG3 on the A7III and the S-Cinetone on the A7IV were very, very similar, meaning that the shot came half ready and the grading was minimal to get to a very nice point. And the dynamic range was also very similar. Now, not very surprisingly, the S-Log 3 performed quite similar in the highlights, but it shined a little bit more in the shadows, maintaining the footage with a little bit less noise. But it needed a lot of massaging in the clip with the Lumetri color and also on DaVinci to get to a point that looked as nice as the Cinetone or HLG. And still I don't know if I did it quite well, so it definitely needs some practice. So I think the voting on this one is going to be totally different for each one of you. And in my case, for what I do and for my client work, the A7III suits me just fine in this case, since the HLG was very similar to the Cinetone, which is probably what someone would use with the A7IV to be a little bit faster in the delivery. But definitely having the option of using S-Log 3 in a bit harsher situations would be an amazing tool to have. So for this one, I vote pretty good to have. Alright, let's talk about 4K quality. Okay, so now I'm already gonna warn you that the differences on this one are gonna shout at you. Now both of these cameras downsample 6K and 7K to do the 4K image you're seeing, and they are super sharp. They're both amazing cameras for that. They're actually so sharp, shooting at 25 frames per second, that actually I know a lot of people that buy diffusion filters to make it look a little bit softer and less digital. Now let's address the elephant in the room, which is the 4K 60 on the A7IV. And mostly what has been talked about is the crop factor that it introduces when you're shooting at this frame rate and resolution. which is quite heavy at 1.5, so you really cropped in a lot. Now if you have space or a wider lens, you're gonna get away with it without any kind of problems. It's definitely unfortunate that you can't just switch from 4K 25 and 60 and have the same field of view. The difference in quality between the 4K slowed down from the A7IV and the 1080p slowed down and upscaled from the A7 III are just enormous. Now, even if it's not perfect, and I would prefer the way that the 4K in higher frame rates is implemented in the A7S III, for example, I cannot complain at how good it is on the A7IV, and I have to vote I need it for this one. Now let's talk a little bit about stabilization, and both of these cameras offer in-body image stabilization that is actually pretty good. But the A7IV has some extra features that can make the use of it even better. The first option you get with the A7IV is to put it in active stabilization, which tries to align the physical stabilization of the sensor with a little bit of software stabilization, making the image quite smooth and nice even if you're walking without much care. But it's definitely not perfect, and you can still improve it a lot by using your editing software stabilization feature, especially if you're using DaVinci. But the star of the game here is something that's actually incorporated also in the A7C, which is the sister of the A7 III, and some of the newer Sony cameras, which is the gyroscopic data inside the camera when you're recording something. This means that the camera is at all times recording how is it moving in space, so that the file later on has all this information that can be counterbalanced by one Sony-specific software called Catalyst Browse. I could just tell you about it, but it's better to just show you. The image on the left has zero stabilization applied on camera. And the one on the right is the one stabilized by Catalyst Browse, and it's just insane. It transformed me into a human gimbal. Now there's a catch here. For this to work properly, you have to use high shutter speeds, meaning that in situations in which you don't have as much light as we had there, it would be quite hard to use this technique. So you'd be probably limited to using only the active stabilization instead of the gyroscopic data. And also, since you have to pass all the files through Catalyst Browse and then export them to be able to use them stabilized, it becomes a very slow workflow if you have a lot of clips. So after saying all this, maybe my vote is gonna surprise you, but for this one, I'm gonna vote I need it, because this is such a cool feature that I think all the cameras should have, and it might even save some sort of shots that you just didn't have the gimbal, you didn't have the battery anymore, or you had it in your hands and you didn't have the time to properly balance it on a gimbal. So I think this can be a lifesaver, and I'll vote I need. Okay, so in this category, we grouped together many of the extra features that the A7IV offers. So the first one is the breathing compensation, in which the camera is going to compensate a little bit for the breathing that select Sony cameras do when used for video. So if you have a problem with any of your lenses, this could save you. Now, two of the minor features that were added were the focus mapping and the webcam support. The focus mapping looks a little bit like a heat screen, changing the color of what's in focus and what's not for you to clearly see what's going on. So I still found the peaking to be much more useful, and I still haven't found anyone who's using actually the focus mapping. Now there's also webcam native support on the camera, meaning that you can do some streaming using directly the options in the menu. And it's something that was already kinda implemented using some software from Sony in previous cameras like the A7III, for example. So even the procedure being a little bit different, it kinda offers you the same, so it's not something revolutionary, it's just nice to have. A lot of cameras have this 30 minutes limit recording that the A7IV does not have. And this, of course, it's going to be especially useful when you're recording a little bit longer format content, like for example, me recording YouTube videos, doing these talking head videos here, or when we go out to shoot for clients and we had to shoot a concert, for example, that might last even 1 hour. In these cases, mostly we have dummy batteries, or we connect the cameras to the plug, meaning that the battery will never finish. And we make sure to insert SD cards that can handle even more than 1 hour of recording without any problem. So the only limit in the camera is actually this 30 minutes recording time. So now that I have a resource with the smartphone showing me for how long I've been recording, this is not a major issue for me anymore, but it has been in the past a massive one. So since this affects our job directly, I think I have to vote for this one. I need it, and I think we agree on this one. Okay, so let's check our options and their values here. The thing is, we can find in the market the A7 III used in a very good state and with some warranty for about $1,800, be it in the US or in Europe. And the new A7IV runs for about $2,700 to $2,800 in the US and a little bit over 3,100 in Europe. Meaning we're gonna have $850 to $1,200 difference from getting one or the other. Okay, so what could you do with this money? If you're really into photography, you could perfectly well get, with the price of an A7 IV, the A7 III with a 35 and an 85 primes from Sony without any issues. If you're more like an all-rounder, you could totally get the A7 III with a 17 to 28 Tamron plus the 28 to 75, putting a little bit of extra cash, but not much. Now, for you to decide if it's worth getting the A7 IV or not, you're gonna have to run through our checklist and see if any of the things we mentioned is vital for you or not in your workflow. In case you wanna know, let's talk about my decision on this topic. And there were 3 different things that I voted as I needed throughout this whole video. And they were the flip out screen, the 4K 60, and also the steady shot option. But none of these were perfect out of the box. So for now, I'm gonna keep my beloved A7 III, but I'm gonna keep an eye out on everything new that Sony releases. And by the way, regarding Claudio, he's very happy with his A7 IV, so he won't be switching anytime soon. Alright, thank you so much for watching. If you have any doubts or comments, pop them in the comment section below. And if you wanna watch something else that might be really cool and tailored just for you, you can try this video over here that YouTube is selecting specially according to your taste. Alright, thanks so much for watching again, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao, ciao!